Excuse me, ma'am. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the cottage. So we're with Elaine, and we wanted to find out the origins of the cottage, who built it, and when they built it.
It was built by my great-grandfather, Scott. We believe it was 1889. Wasn't registered with the town until early 1900s. They didn't do it back when he first built it. He got the land as some kind of a government grant, but he built the cottage.
By himself?
Well, I don't know. I'm sure he had help.
And is it true that it was partial shipwreck wood?
I don't know about that.
No. And how many people eventually began to use it in the family?
Well,
It's divided into two pieces.
it was my grandfather, my great-grandfather gave it to my grandfather, Joseph Scott. But he gave him 90%. Essie was his sister, and she got 10%. I don't know why he did it that way, but that's the way it was. So my grandmother and grandfather, Essie didn't really have anything to do with the cottage. You know, she owned 10%, but she really didn't do anything with it. But my grandmother used to come up in April and stay until October in the camp. The two main sections of the cottage were rented basically to the same people every year until the last 2 weeks of August. The last 2 weeks of August, the north side was my mother and father.
What were their names?
Pardon me?
What were their original names?
Well, my mother was Anita Shirley Scott. My father was John Lewis Willoughby. Now they and myself and my sibling would come the end of August, and on the south side it would be Russell Kent Scott, and Carol Bartlett Scott, and their 4 girls. But other than that, it was rented all the time.
What were the Scott girls, or what are the Scott girls'
The
names?
Scott girls are Lee, who is Lee Mack now, and Tracy is the next one, and she's Tracy Grab now. And then it was Leslie, and she's Leslie Slosh now. And then finally Chris, and she's Chris Dugan now. So the cottage now, when my mother and Russell and Aunt Phyllis passed away, well, first of all, I take that back. Essie's 10% went to her daughter, Esrin. Esrin never married. She never had any children. So when she passed away, she gave her 10% to my Aunt Phyllis. So it belonged to my mother, my Uncle Russell, and Aunt Phyllis. So when Phyllis passed away.
What year was that roughly that she passed away?
Oh goodness, I'm not sure.
That was quite a few years ago.
Yeah, it was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
It was before my mother.
She was the oldest.
No, she was the middle.
The middle?
Yeah,
I thought she was always the oldest. No,
my mother was the oldest of
I
the 3
apologize.
siblings under Clara and Joseph
Okay.
Scott.
Well, she passed
Then
after your mother did,
yeah.
yeah.
It was my mother was Anita, and then the second one was Phyllis, and then finally Russell. There was another child between Phyllis and Russell. It was a boy. His name was Daniel, but he died as a baby. I don't know of what, but he died as a baby. And everybody said he was too beautiful to live.
So this was the first cottage on this strip, or one of the first cottages?
Yeah, there was nothing around
Excuse
it originally. And then it started building up around it after that, but originally it was one of the first cottages on the beach. And a few years back, it was still one of the oldest, in fact, if not the oldest one on the beach, especially owned by the same family. Because it has been in the same family since it was built. Okay, during World War II at the Dungoyne Cottage, you had to have blackout curtains. You couldn't have light showing anywhere. But yet the Navy would come by and use our cottage as a pivot point. That would be how they could locate where they were, because we were the only cottage that had a flat roof. I first came here when I was a baby, and I've been coming every year since. Well,
and
almost.
what year were you a baby?
Oh, a long time ago.
We're not getting that out of her. Sometime after World War II. Anyway, you came with your grandparents?
Yeah, and I used to spend the summer with my grandmother until I became dating age. Then she wanted no part of it.
And your brothers and sisters and cousins were here, I assume?
No, just my grandmother and I.
She would come from what month to what month?
Oh, I'd come after school got out, and I'd stay until my parents came the end of August, and go home with them.
Okay.
Because school started after Labor Day, so we went home Labor Day.
What was the center like then? Was there a carousel, the roller coaster, the games? Like, what was that like?
There was all kinds of rides. The carousel was across the street from Willie's, which is still there.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful carousel. It even had the brass ring that you had to try to catch to get a free ride. And then over on the edge, there was the little boats in water that would go around the circle. In fact, I put Dale in it when he was, well, before you were, I don't know if you were born yet. Yes, you may have been born. But he didn't like it. We had to pull him out. And they had all kinds of rides. They had all kinds of games of chance. They had the frolics. Oh yes, they had the Wheel of Fortune, you know. You put your money down, whether it was 10 cents or a quarter, whatever, and they'd spin the wheel, and if your number came up, you won. That's how I won my parakeet for a dime.
Wow, you won a parakeet? And what about the cigarette game?
No, I didn't play that, but you kids did. And there was other things you could win too. And then there was the Frolics, which was a nightclub, and they had named people there, famous people there at the time. I mean, I don't even remember some of these, but I remember Teresa Brewer was there, and your Uncle Russell loved Teresa Brewer. And there was the Tony Bennett was there. Johnny Mathis was there. You know, so there were a lot of named people. And a lot of them would come across, when we stayed across the street when there was no room here, we stayed at Methuen's.
Methuen's up the road?
Messina's Cottage.
Oh, Messina's up the road.
Right across the street.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of them would go to his place after the show. So we got a good glimpse of them. And the Frolics was very, very upscale. I mean, you dressed to go there. And they had meals, they had cocktails, and they had these name brand entertainers.
Could you walk to the Frolics
It was on
from
the
the
ocean.
beach?
Yes, you could.
Because there was a boardwalk then?
There was no boardwalk, but you could walk to
But
the
years
beach.
ago, there was the boardwalk on the beach.
Well,
All the way up to Saybrook. You used to tell me there was the boardwalk.
Not during my time.
But before when
Before
Grandma and Grandpa was here.
There was a sidewalk,
Yeah,
but that's long gone.
yeah. But
I
it
mean,
was
I
there.
didn't even see it.
But Grandma and Grandpa's time.
Yeah, probably when they were young.
Yeah.
It was right, like Mr. Mike's was here, and there was an opening for public people to go to the beach, and then the Frolics was right here.
I think
Then
it
it
was
became
the After Five, right? The After Five Club?
No,
No?
no, it was much bigger than that. Then it became a discount house, the discount house, and then the discount, they tore it down. The discount house went over on the other corner. But there were a lot of good places, a lot of stands with a lot of good food. Your grandmother used to like it, and when I went down there was one place that had spinach pies that she liked, and I always bring her home a spinach pie. We would go down to the beach, I mean down to the center, because it was kiddies' day. So you got to ride, the children got to ride the rides at a lower cost. You could buy a book of tickets, and they were like almost half price.
What about the years ago when we were growing up and we used to watch across the street when the bikers were all there and the paddy wagon used to come on Fridays and Saturdays?
Well, they basically, the best time that they came was Labor Day weekend.
Yeah.
Because in back of where the condos are now, I mean, it used to be Omer's store and the little cottage, and then his cottage on the other side. But in back of them, there were a lot of small cottages, and they were pretty much rented by college guys. And for the town to make a little extra money at the end of the season, they would come pull in with the paddy wagon, and you'd see everybody running through the marsh.
Trying to get away.
Because they would pick them up and take them to jail, and they had to pay to get out. I was actually over there one time when they came.
Partying?
No, I was drinking lemonade, but
Lemonade. Spiked.
no, it was quiet. There was no party going on at the cottage I was on. I was just kind of visiting with a couple of the guys that we knew. And a cop came up and looked at me and said, "Are you married? Do you live here?" And I said, "No."
So he let you go.
He just walked away. And then Pee-wee, there was a guy named Pee-wee, and his brother's name was Gus, and I don't know their last names now. But he came over, he said, "Come on, before they decide to take you too."
Awesome.
So we went back farther to where he was staying.
Mom, do you remember when we were hungry for lunch and we used to go next door to Patty's to get like tuna
Yes.
grinders, and they had vegetables and fruits and stuff?
The cottage originally belonged, when I was younger, it was much smaller than it is now. It was red. And it belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Lowell. And then when they decided to retire from, being owners here, they sold it to the Mr. and Mrs. Patty. And they put up a little stand on the edge of the property right by the road, and they had a farm. So they didn't live too far from here, I've forgotten for sure, Lawrence area somewhere. So they would bring fresh vegetables for sale, and they would make really good grinders.
Tuna grinders, I remember.
Yeah.
Salami grinders, Italian grinders, yeah.
And then I guess they got to the point where they, didn't want it anymore. They had kind of moved up the way a bit for a while. And then the person that has it now won the lottery, and that's how she bought it.
The cottage?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they started building, going up and out and back, and made the huge place, which is quite nice, but nothing like what it was originally.
But didn't years ago Grandpa have the opportunity to buy that place?
And he didn't want it.
Because it was too expensive?
I don't know. He just.
I heard it was like $20,000 and he thought it was too much money.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was, but I just remember he didn't want it.
Which we now wish that he did buy it.
Yeah.
Because we'd be living large.
Yeah. That would be nice.
2 side by sides.
Yeah.
An appearance of Scott Willoughby, one of the dinosaurs of the cottage.
John, wasn't it?
Was it John? I wasn't sure.
That was Grandpa Scott's father. John and his brother built this.
Yeah, I knew that he had built it, but I could not remember his first
I
name.
think it was John. That's the only name that comes to mind.
Well, that's a good possibility. Yeah, Essie was Grandpa Scott's sister.
Right. Then there was Esther and her daughter.
Right, who never married, and
Right.
had no children. And that her share, her lousy 10%.
Yeah, that went to Maryland.
Well, it went
eventually.
to Phyllis and then
And then to
Phyllis
Maryland.
to Maryland. From Lawrence on the bus.
On the bus, yeah. Well, that was when the bus stop was right here at the bottom of the
Right.
stairs,
Right.
right across from Omer's.
What year was that, roughly?
Oh shit! That went right up until 19 years, so that was 60s before they stopped that bus stop. You know, the bus used to come from other towns to the center, and then the bus from the center ran all the way up the line. Did they go to Hampton or just Seabrook?
I think they might have gone to Hampton.
I thought so. So we'd have to
And
go
so,
across.
and if you called that phone, you'd have to let it ring because he might have
You had
a
to wait for
customer.
Omer to come out and answer it.
And he'd have to come outside and answer the phone. Bacon soda, because up here it's called
It's hot.
tonic.
Right.
So he'd always give me a hard time about it.
Yeah.
But he had penny candy and he had regular candy bars.
Yep, and
And
he had
the
ice
funny
cream.
books, the comic
Yeah, oh
books
yeah, for a
with
nickel.
covers.
Yeah,
torn
the
off.
covers were ripped off, you know, so they'd cost you a nickel for a comic book.
And the and crossword puzzles that Mom
Oh yeah,
used to
mother
get.
bought those.
She'd stock up on those for the whole winter
And he had
because they were like 10 cents.
he had kerosene that we used to use back with the first stove we had. There was a wood burner on the sidearm. You remember those old Glenwoods?
Yeah.
And we'd go over there to get kerosene for those old kerosene heaters that we had.
Yeah. The little round ones.
Yeah, those black things
Yeah.
out of the cottage.
There was a garden that was one.
Yeah, they had, what the hell do they call those? But they were the safety guard. And they had to make sure that everything was blacked out during the war.
I told them, I said, Mr. and Mrs. Lowell.
Right.
Helen and George Lowell.
Right, and they come over to play cards.
Yep, she did. He
Yep.
didn't always. And he was missing some fingers.
Yep.
And he worked up at the amusement park after he had retired from whatever he did
He
originally.
worked in one of the mills in Lawrence.
Yeah. And I was kidding because I said, Grandma knew the Lowells who lived in Lawrence.
Yeah.
And she knew a Mrs. Lawrence who lived in Lowell.
It was only so many grand, so
Yeah, it
much
was like
grand.
20 grand,
That's what I
30
remember.
at the most, but I think it
That
was
was
more like
that was
20.
a long time ago.
Yeah, it don't matter. Back then,
And-
cottages up here were still selling for more than that.
Yeah, I know,
And
but I
Greg
mean,
thought
that
it was
was
too much money.
that
Yeah,
was the
well,
Lowells,
they
right?
regretted not buying it afterwards. So, let me on the left or the right. She was to the right of the last cottage.
Are you talking about the Messina cottages?
Well, she
Or
was,
that-
no, behind that.
Behind them, yeah.
Diane, when I
Okay,
went with
yeah,
Diane.
so,
Russell used to go with her mother years ago.
okay, yeah. I do remember remember that.
$2.50. $2.
Wow, it's very cheap.
Back when I was young, I didn't eat them, but Mother used to get them, and they didn't cost nothing.
$2.50 for a lobster roll.
Maybe $2.
Nice.
I don't remember what they paid for them at that time.
I know they
didn't
used to
pay
get the
attention to it.
big lobsters for, I don't know, 70 cents a pound or something. They bought a whole lobster.
Well, then Grandma, after a while,
Yeah.
wow, when things got higher priced, she would just buy the bodies.
Yeah.
You know, these places would make lobster rolls, but they didn't use the bodies. They used the tail and the claws.
Right. So
So
you had
the
all that
bodies
meat
you
and the
could buy
legs
for
and
almost
everything
nothing. And
picked out.
she'd sit there for hours just picking it apart, pulling all the little meat up. She says, actually, it's a lot of work, but it was actually the sweetest meat. Used to, we'd hear people say, okay, the hake are in,
The water in? Oh, the hake. Yeah.
the silver hake.
Yeah.
They would come in close to shore for some reason, and the tide would change and they couldn't get out. So you could go out there in the water
Baskets,
with a flashlight
buckets.
and just pick them up by a tail and put them in a bucket. And then Grandma would make the fish chowder with them. That's why you don't eat fish, because you watched Russell and Dad clean them. See you next summer. Thanks for visiting.